Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story. Hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality and not illusion or delusion that's going to determine what the future will bring. And I need to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views, and well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of our good friend, Joel Skousen. Hi, Joel. How are we doing?
I'm just fine, Dr. Stan. Good to be with you.
Well, it's good to have you here, and certainly there are so many amazing things going on today. I mean, certainly I've been at this for almost 50 years, and I've never seen so many things taking place at one time. So where do we start today?
Well, the big top story still is the massive manipulation of voter polling and voter results in the primary election here, and so let's start with that. It looks like we're going to have to deal with the resurgence of Newt all over again. It's hard to tell why the powers that be seem to be so desperate to topple Mitt Romney as the front runner. Although he's not an insider, he's taken every possible position the establishment wants. He has a neocon foreign policy, surrounded himself with neocon advisors, including Michael Chertoff. He's in favor of indefinite detention and has even hinted at using the dreaded VAT tax to solve the deficit problem. Well, only Newt Gingrich could be worse than Romney, and that's why the powers that be are working overtime to create yet another phony surge for the former House Speaker. He's a secret globalist who betrayed the conservatives in 1994. Now, if they can get him a win in South Carolina, they hope to keep him on a roll in Florida and beyond. Sarah Palin showed her subservience to the powers that be yet again this week by endorsing Gingrich. But Gingrich's ex-wife is threatening to derail his bandwagon with a no-holds-bar killer interview with ABC News, exposing Gingrich's hypocritical dark side. So far, the network is desperately trying to find a way to bury this devastating indictment until the South Carolina primary is over, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. There's too much news that's focused on it. Well, as John Huntsman and Rick Perry ended their campaigns, the establishment's betting everything now on Gingrich or Santorum. The Kingmakers asked Perry to continue his campaign even after his poor showing in Iowa, not knowing who they would try or could resurrect, against Romney. But now they want him out of the race so that the manipulated voters in South Carolina are not split between 3 false conservatives, only 2. That way, Gingrich or Santorum has a better chance at coming out with a win above Romney's numbers. But so far, they're both still behind him. Right now, they're pushing for Gingrich more than Santorum, even after the first phony surge for Gingrich failed. This headline from the AP is emblematic of the typical media theme. Quote, Republican presidential candidate Newt Gingrich is drawing big, enthusiastic crowds and fending off new attacks from the GOP frontrunner Mitt Romney, while reveling in a strong debate performance and a nod from Tea Party favorite Sarah Palin, unquote. Well, Palin's endorsement has to go down as the second most stupid thing she ever did, next to joining the John McCain campaign. CBS News confirmed Perry would be dropping out of the race, and he has endorsed Gingrich just as several new polls out of the Florida state showed Gingrich with a discernible bump following his performance at Monday's debate. Now, notice that wordage. There's ever such a discernible bump. What a nice way of saying he barely registered on the polls. Well, you never heard anything about Ron Paul getting any surge at all, even though he's had a steady increase in support in every one of these primaries.
Well, of course, you and I know why. That's because the media is controlled. There's 6 corporations that control it, largely control what the American people think. But what is encouraged to me, it really is the fact there seem to be more and more Americans waking up, as is reflected by the response to certainly Ron Paul. Whenever he's in one of these debates, he gets more applause than anyone else there. We'll be back in just a moment here with Joel Skousen. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Our guest this afternoon, as always on Thursdays, is Joel Skousen of World Affairs Brief. We're talking about the election, the fact that the powers that be, some people call them the establishment, I call them the Brotherhood of Darkness, doesn't matter what you call them. They're the secret force that runs both political parties, the military, the banks, the corporations, the media, the educational system, the foundations, and they largely determine the course of our nation. Well, anyway, of course, they seem to be intent upon trying to get Newt Gingrich resurrected. And I mean, here's a man, he is a radical liberal. He's always been a radical liberal. I've followed him ever since I was the Republican congressional candidate in 1988, running against Leon Panetta from the 16th Congressional District. We went back to Washington, D.C., and met Gingrich. He was a phony liberal then. He is still a phony liberal, New Ager, a man without any redeeming moral qualities, and yet the media keeps trying to build him up. And of course there's this new scandal as far as both of his previous wives telling what a scoundrel he is and how unfaithful he is, and yet that seems to be sort of being glossed over. So you go right ahead, Joel.
Yeah, well, they're really pumping up the fact that he had a couple of sterling moments with his silver slick tongue in the debate. And it makes me wonder, why have there been so many debates this election cycle? In a normal election year, you'd be lucky to have 3 or 4. Now they've come almost every 2 weeks. Of course, they're all run by establishment news machines that have a clear agenda to promote the latest, quote, flavor of the month candidate who's, quote, surging against Romney, or to evade or embarrass Ron Paul. That's their agenda. The first half of every hour in every debate is showcasing those that they want to report. You know who it is because the first question always goes to them. Went to Gingrich this last time. And went to Santorum before. They always get the first softball questions designed to allow them to shine. Ron Paul always gets the token or quirky questions that make him look bad. Well, Ron Paul was clearly as much a target of the host in this debate in South Carolina as was Mitt Romney. They may not want Romney, but they can control him if he wins the nomination. Ron Paul's the only candidate who is a threat to the establishment controlling government. FoxNews.com, the supposed conservative TV network, made a blatant attempt to evade even mentioning Ron Paul in its debate analysis. Steve Watson of Infowar.com gave us a blow-by-blow account, and it is phenomenal. It says the Dirty Tricks campaign against Ron Paul reached new heights during the South Carolina
Hold
debate.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Sydney Joel is pointing out that a reporter from Infowars.com had pointed out that Sydney, the effort to discredit Ron Paul reached new heights during the last debate. Basically, of course, the powers that be don't want Ron Paul because it's the only one, of course, they don't control. They control all the rest of them. And even though Mitt Romney, that's very good. is not a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, why, of course, he's making every concession. He'll do anything he has to become the next president of the United States. And, of course, he's getting a tremendous amount of his money right now in donations from Goldman Sachs and the major banks. So they're certainly going along with it from that point of view. But certainly they're doing everything they can to discredit Ron Paul. But pick up the story there.
Well, Fox News does get a lot of listeners who are Ron Paul fans, and I'll tell you, they really got into trouble. Not only was Ron Paul excluded from the first 40 minutes of the debate, but they gave him poisonous questions in the second half. And but during the commentary, during the break, John Roberts blatantly excluded Paul from the charts and graphs that he presented, representing feedback from the viewers. The results of Twitter surveys, in which the candidate had most accurately answered questions and the question was who had most accurately answered questions and who had performed the best, were displayed with Ron Paul's name nowhere to be seen. Almost an hour later, Roberts was called on the carpet by fellow host Fox anchor Harris Faulkner, who said, "John, you caused a fury in my world. You left off Ron Paul." And before Roberts attempted to slime out of the fact that he had totally excluded Paul from his results tally by saying that because Ron Paul won a huge majority in every category, on Fox News, it was unnecessary to report at all. Isn't that amazing, Stan? If anyone else had been number one by large measure, they would have only been talking about who was number one. But when Ron Paul does it, they say, oh, we can't mention it because he won. It's obvious. Well, Roberts then went through each debate topic again with Paul added to the graphics after they forced him to put Ron Paul on the screen. As he explained the results, Harris downplayed and skipped over Ron Paul's figures in every category. In other words, he wouldn't read them. He wouldn't point out to them, causing Harris Faulkner again to interject. John, can I stop you right there because I'm getting real-time feedback from people, and they're not happy. Ron Paul did not do just well. He did the best from that chart, and I just wanted to be fair because people are watching for this. Isn't that amazing to have on Fox News, of course, an honest commentator sitting there with a person who's the primary commentator who's obviously got the word to not mention Ron Paul.
Well, I think when you work for the media and you're honest by it, they're going to get you sooner or later. I never forget one time being on a radio program with a major host in San Francisco, radio talk show host there for 25 years. His name was Jim Easton. I was in the studio. He said, Stan, this was off the air, if I said what I really believed on this program, this station, KGO, why, of course, they'd fire me tomorrow. We went back on the air 3 minutes later. He said, you know, if anybody ever told me what to say on this radio program, I'd walk out of the studio. He looked over me, he grinned, and he winked. The audience couldn't see the grin or the wink, but this is the reality, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, I'm very, very, very concerned about this gentleman who is pointing out the hypocrisy of what's going on, because he could instantly lose his position, or he could have a fatal accident. And I'm not simply joking. Go right ahead.
The fact that Ron Paul was the outright winner of the debate was remarkable, given the fact that the moderators had done their utmost to exclude, smear, and represent the congressman earlier in the night. The opening portion of the debate was exclusively reserved for Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum. That's what I mean about promoting the establishment favorites first. Giving them a chance to attack frontrunner Mitt Romney in the atmosphere that more resembled a Jerry Springer show than a coherent political debate. Well, refraining from joining in with such pantomime ridiculousness, Ron Paul patiently waited to be addressed by the moderators, and waited. Indeed, during the first 40 minutes, Ron Paul was only asked one question, and that was about scathing attacks on the other candidates in campaigns, as if the others weren't doing that. Refusing to be drawn into what was rapidly becoming something resembling an open segment of SmackDown, Paul succinctly noted that he believed pointing out legitimate flaws in the other candidates' record was fair game. As the exclusion of Ron Paul continued, it even triggered the commercial break discussion between Fox political panel about how Paul was being sidelined. Analyst Ed Rollins commented, I thought Paul placed second in New Hampshire and was effectively second in Iowa, but they got him standing way over there on the side of the podium. Well, this is what I mean by even the placement of candidates on the stage is scripted to make sure that Ron Paul is sidelined. When Paul was finally asked further questions, they were so leading and laced with underlying venom that it defied belief. With almost every question, the congressman had to begin his answer by correcting the moderators for grossly distorting his position on multiple issues. First, Paul had to once again explain that there were significant differences between, quote, defense spending and Pentagon waste, and that he was not about to decimate defense funding, as the moderator suggested. You don't understand. There's a difference between military spending and defense spending. Just because you spend billions of dollars on an embassy in Baghdad, bigger than the Vatican, you consider that defense spending? I consider that waste, said Paul, to thunderous applause. I want to cut military money. I don't want to cut defense spending. Paul said, I want to bring the troops home. Well, the contrast between the Washingtonian principles of Paul and his neocon counterparts is vast. Conservatives were horrified as Romney proudly answers that he would have signed the NDAA, giving government authority to indefinitely detain people aligned with al-Qaeda, and even said that they didn't have any rights. He pontificated the old neocon propaganda about violent jihadists having declared war on us, and that's supposedly supposed to justify the demise of our civil liberties.
I think it's important that this is the National Defense Appropriations Act, which allows, of course, the president or the military just to arrest anybody, put them into a prison, no habeas corpus, no rights, no charges, just held indefinitely. And when Mitt Romney came out and said he would have signed the bill, he was booed by the audience. Of course, when they asked the question to Ron Paul, he said it's wrong, it's unconstitutional. We should not be certainly taking away the rights of American citizens with this legislation. It's like the Patriot Act was bad, and this is far worse because it takes away the right of habeas corpus, which is the foundation of our free society. And he was cheered and applauded by the audience. I mean, it was just amazing to see how so many of these people recognize the hypocrisy of Mitt Romney and certainly the libertarian, pro-liberty view of Congressman Ron Paul.
And his is the true pro-life view. Rick Santorum, who claims to be pro-life, just was reveling in the fact that, we can kill you. We can go out and assassinate people. Tell that to Al-Awlaki, he said. We've done it. We've done it to an American citizen. He was bragging about it. Actually, Obama administration not only assassinated U.S.-born Islamic cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who never charged with a crime of any kind, let alone convicted and sentenced in a court, but they also killed al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, who was killed by a drone strike in Yemen while he was having dinner with a cousin, who also perished.
But this was a couple of weeks after they'd killed his father.
Right.
A man, he may have been a terrorist, but certainly he entitled as an American citizen to be arrested and tried. No, they just killed him. But then 2 weeks later, they killed his son, never accused of anything. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, if you are accused, they're going to kill your family as well. That's the sort of thing you'd expect from a communist country or a fascist country, but from America. And then no outcry from Mitt Romney or Rick Santorum or Newt Gingrich. Why were they all silent about that? Why was certainly Ron Paul the only one who brought up this fact? Go ahead.
Well, Newt Gingrich said it was irrational of Congressman Paul to insist that there are limits on government's powers of discretionary killing. Irrational? Elaborating on that idea in January 18th interview in South Carolina, Pastor Kevin Bowling, Gingrich asserted that Dr. Paul's insistence on applying the golden rule to foreign policy demonstrated he had absorbed the anti-American, self-hating attitude of the American left. Boy, I'll tell you, that's just an egregious charge that he should be slapped down, and to say it in front of a pastor who didn't, stand up to him on that. Despicable.
And of course, what they've done is they've accused Congressman Paul of being to the left of Obama. I wish, of course, he had gotten on them. This idea of right and left is absurd. Suddenly, he's espousing the cause of freedom and liberty and the rights of the American people, not to be killed, incarcerated, or have their children killed. How would you feel if they killed your son because they didn't like your policies? Go right ahead.
Well, it's really getting bad. It's getting Orwellian. Newt Gingrich decreed claiming that a heroin addict or a methamphetamine addict has lost the ability to be a true citizen. Well, since when? The law not only demands that criminals have rights, but so do drug-addicted people. It cannot be simply arbitrarily disposed of. But this is the way that someone, globalist like Newt Gingrich, thinks. There's nothing in the Declaration of Independence that describes rights as contingent on citizenship. Everyone has God-given rights, according to that document. Individual rights are innate and unalienable. Government, on the other hand, enjoys a contingent existence and can be altered or abolished whenever it imperils those rights. Well, like most people who support him, Dr. Paul has no interest in drug consumption, even though he does not believe government has the right, under the Constitution, to prosecute victimless crimes. He simply understands that there is a matter of constitutional authority. And the government has no right to regulate what individuals choose to ingest, and that includes foods like raw milk or other things.
But of course, the thing is that he's talking about the federal government. If people of the state want to do things, they have that right, whether you agree with it or not. But Congressman Paul is pointing out that there is nothing, no right in the Constitution that allows the government to keep people from their folly. Where in the Constitution does it allow the federal government to regulate milk or how your toilet flushes or whether you use drugs or not or whether you're homosexual? We may disapprove of it, but it is not the function of the federal government. Go right ahead, Joel.
I think that's absolutely true. Well, Ron Paul continues to pick up major endorsements of local South Carolina congressmen or legislators and senators. Especially the big one was the leading state senator, Senator Tom Davis, Republican of Beaufort, South Carolina, endorsed him on Sunday. Sends collectively a very big message to the people of South Carolina that the U.S. is coming together and giving combined endorsements that immediately propels Ron Paul's campaign into serious contender status, but you'd never know that by reading the newspaper. Now, the biggest single threat to the strategy to sell Newt Gingrich to the Republicans as a conservative is the truth. And this week, Marianne Gingrich broke her silence and decided to tell America what the real Newt Gingrich is like. Her interview was with ABC, and they've been trying to bury the story ever since. Fortunately, Matt Drudge got wind of it, trying to shame ABC into airing the interview. And he appears to be successful. Her explosive revelations are like a rock set on the trail before Newt Gingrich. But now a civil war has erupted inside the network, he writes, and insider claims on exactly when the confession will air. The suits at ABC News determined it would be unethical to run Marianne Gingrich's interview so close to the South Carolina primary, it might discredit him. Well, no wonder. One insider argued, however, that the network has been aggressively reporting on the flaws of other candidates, so why not Newt? A decision was tentatively made to air the interview next Monday after all the votes had been counted. Gingrich canceled a press conference on Wednesday to deal with the matter. He believes that what he says in public and how he lives don't have to be connected, said his wife of 18 years. Drudge now says that due to the embarrassment of the Drudge revelation, ABC is now likely to air the segment Thursday on Nightline, and I'm sure it's going to have huge ratings. It is going to be devastating, I think, to Gingrich, especially to conservatives in South Carolina. Well, the leaks about her interview are already starting to emerge. Fox reported that Newt Gingrich's second wife told ABC News that the Republican presidential candidate sought an open marriage and that his campaign positions do not coincide with what she saw during her 18 years of marriage to him. In their first television interview since the 1999 divorce, she told him that Gingrich admitted to a 6-year affair with his congressional aide, who's now his wife, and asked her if she would share him with the other woman. And I just stared at him and said, Callista doesn't care what I do or say, she says. He wanted an open marriage, and I refused. In other words, this is just so much like Newt Gingrich, so full of himself. He'd walk in front of his wife instead of admitting, saying, I'm sorry, saying, hey, you want to share me with another woman? Gingrich wanted this accommodation with his wife only to avoid another messy divorce, which would expose him for the serial philanderer that he really is. Her statement that Newt Gingrich lacks the moral character to serve as president is an absolute truth. And, of course, Stan, it isn't just this problem. You know, even before he was married to his wife, there's many people have talked about his serial adultery and other problems. This guy is a serial predator, just like Herman Cain with women. Well, turning to Mitt Romney, he made a major tactical mistake by acceding to demands to show his tax return. My personal opinion is that no person ought to do this on principle. Tax returns are way too private, an affair for individuals of wealth to be forced to reveal. There's a lot of conservative candidates who have enough money to run a campaign. Hold that
thought. We'll be back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Joel's been talking about the fact that Newt Gingrich has morals that would make Mr. Cain, a former presidential candidate, blush. I mean, Newt Gingrich is a real scoundrel as far as women is concerned, a serial predator. And then, of course, we're going on to talk about the fact that Mitt Romney made a serious tactical error when he agreed to show his tax returns. So go right ahead there.
But, you know, many conservatives have actually not refused to go to run for Congress or public office because of the financial disclosure forms, which put all of their financial investments at risk. Now, certainly, you know, I'm personally glad that Romney's been able to structure his income to fall under the capital gains tax rate of 15%. That doesn't make him evil or anything else. I mean, if I had that much money, I would be wanting to save it too. Who wants to give it to the government? Deriding him for that is simply building more class warfare in the U.S. I have many criticisms of Romney, but that's not one of them, trying to preserve your money from the government. Only Ron Paul got it right when asked during the debate what he would do or what's the appropriate tax rate for the American income tax. Romney said it should be 24%, and Ron Paul said it should be 0. In other words, abolish it. That got a great applause as well. Contributions should be revealed, but even those are confusing and misleading. OpenSecrets.org provided a profiling of where contributions come from each candidate. And even, you know, I'm going to comment on what you mentioned before about Goldman Sachs being a major contributor. Conservative pundits have made much about the fact that all the big banks and investment firms have backed Romney. But we have to understand this is misleading. They are also backing Gingrich and Santorum. Everybody but Ron Paul has got no contributions from. But even that doesn't tell the whole story. While Romney's campaign for 2012 lists $376,000 from Goldman Sachs, this isn't coming from the company. It's coming from individual brokers. It's very clearly stated on OpenSecrets.org that what the financial contribution forms reveal, you have to put down your employer. And they sort all these by employers. And so when you come out with headlines that Goldman Sachs gives so much to Obama or so much to Senator Hatch or Senator Reid or any of these people, it isn't the company. It's individual brokers. So we have to compare what's going on with individual brokers. Goldman Brokers gave Obama $1.2 million during his campaign. So you have to put one candidate's number alongside the other because obviously Romney does not have anywhere near as much backing from Goldman Brokers as Obama does. In fact, they have generally voted Democrats more than Republicans. But it's also interesting to note that even though this is not the company directly directing these things, and we're talking about Merrill Lynch and J.P. Morgan Chase, all of these companies, they're giving across the spectrum. It's like they're trying to control all the candidates they can. But it's most telling of who they give nothing to, and that's Ron Paul. And that's important to understand because he only gets contributions from the little guy. That should tell us who they don't want and who we should be voting for.
Point well made. I certainly agree with you. Go ahead.
But on other issues, Romney had no high ground to retreat to. The latest charge is that Romney accepted federal pension bailouts for a steel company that went bankrupt during his tenure at Bain Capital. The bankruptcy triggered the federal pension insurance fund to kick in. He also got a $10 billion debt forgiveness decree for Bain Capital just as he entered the firm. That was from the FDIC. All this makes Romney's denouncing of federal bank bailouts a bit hypocritical. Lee Bellinger also sounded the warning about Romney's soft position on raising taxes. With all the GOP candidates, he said, fussing over Mitt Romney and his track record of Bain Capital, it does not strike anyone as odd that none of them are putting the screws to the Massachusetts Republican over his unwillingness to rule out Europe. Not at all. That's because all the others, except Ron Paul, would use that option as well. While Romney says he doesn't want to go down of socialism in a recent Wall Street Journal, he did not rule it out. It even suggested that it might be an option. Well, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I wasn't. No, go right ahead.
The lack of clarity on the subject is ominous, given that a VAT is probably the only way to come close to funding the federal government at its current level of outrageous spending, and we don't want to do that. Since none of the other candidates are forcefully calling Romney out on this issue, I suspect that an eventual Republican betrayal on establishing a VAT tax is likely.
I think people have to understand that before 1913, the government was federal government was funded by tariffs and excise taxes. And if we just got government back to the position it should be, we wouldn't need all these taxes. But today, of course, we have 43 cents out of every dollar this federal government spends is borrowed, and we are in an impossible situation. They're going to destroy the value of our currency and impoverish our people. We've got to get somebody in there who will simply cut back on federal spending and try to preserve our monetary system.
Clouds gather across the sea. Let us swear allegiance.
Well, this is Dr. Stan. One of the frightening things is the average individual honestly thinks, well, somehow this is going to work out. I'm going to be able to keep my Social Security. I'm going to be able to keep my Medicare. I'm going to be able to keep the value of my savings. I'm going to live comfortably. I'm going to retire. And they don't understand. There is an organized, orchestrated plan to destroy the value of our currency and impoverish the American people. People can't believe that. They don't want to believe this, and yet if they're not involved in trying to get responsible people into government, they will have nobody to blame, because we've turned our back on our Constitution, we've turned our back on a responsible monetary system, and we're on a one-way track towards destruction. Go right ahead.
Well, I might disagree slightly with that, Dr. Stan. I don't think it's a deliberate attempt to destroy the money. They certainly will capitalize on crisis to drive us into a new world monetary order, but they really have destroyed the money because they wanted to be able to buy all these benefits for people and foreign aid and military intervention without taxing people. That's why it runs counter to the notion that they want to destroy the money. The money is very useful. The fiat money doesn't want to be destroyed. They want to milk it for all it's worth. And they can do so a lot longer, but I think that's an important thing to understand, that this is the main process they love to use, and there isn't a deliberate attempt to destroy the dollar. They will use war and other things to cause a new currency someday, but they're going to milk this dollar for a lot further than they want. If they really wanted to destroy it, they could simply pull the plug today and do so, but I think the fact that they keep using the dollar to further purpose means that it has a purpose for them for a while yet longer.
Well, let's just wait and see. Go right ahead.
Well, the thing that people need to understand about a VAT tax is that it would tax goods at all layers of production, and most of that is hidden, and the prices just rise phenomenally. And also, VAT tax typical in Europe is near the 20% level, and that has a devastating effect. It almost destroys all major purposes. When you have to add 20% to the cost of a car or an airplane or a boat, those things just dry up. And only the very super wealthy can. So it's really devastating. Even restaurants suffered almost a 30% collapse in Paris, France, when they introduced the VAT tax of nearly 20%, because people just decided not to eat out rather than pay that VAT tax. So it's a real problem. To get a VAT tax from here, all the political class needs to do is to wait around for a, quote, responsible Republican to come around and do something. This is one of those aspects...
Hold that thought. We'll be back in a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Joel has simply been talking about the value-added tax. Most people really don't understand what its significance is or how it works, but it's simply a tax that is allowed on every level of production and sale of a product. And basically over in Europe, what you add about 20% to the cost of a meal, you add about 20% to the cost of a car, and when you massively increase prices, why you cut consumption? People just can't afford it. They're just not going to go out and put an extra 20% into a car. They're not going to be eating out. They're certainly going to be cutting back on their new clothes. They're certainly cutting back on literally almost everything they buy. The value-added tax is a devastating tax. And of course, that said, oh, well, it'll be fairer than an income tax. No, ladies and gentlemen, what we do not need is to try to figure out what the best form of taxes is. What we need to do is figure out how to cut the taxes and do away with the income tax and let people determine what they're going to do with their money rather than how the government will spend it in their pursuit of a new world order and a new world religion. And remember, the primary function of our government today is to actually bring all nations into this one world government, and of course to use our financial and military power to control the world. In the meantime, of course, they have to buy the support of the American people of providing them all these wonderful goodies: Social Security, free medical care, disability payments, food stamps. But they don't have enough money. And if they tax the people for this, they'd be furious. So what are we doing? Why, simply borrowing the money. The old idea, it's great. If you can take money from Peter to pay Paul, you get, of course, Paul's support. But if you can give money to both Peter and Paul, they will just be so happy. Everybody will support you until the whole thing collapses. Before we go on, Joel, let's go ahead and tell our listeners how they can subscribe to the World Affairs Brief and get your books that you have.
Thanks, Dan. The World Affairs Brief is on my website, worldaffairsbrief.com. There's a modest subscription price for my work, to support my work, but people get a free sample issue by emailing me at worldaffairsbrief.com. On my other website, joelskousen.com, you can see a picture and a summary of each of the books that I have for sale. The Secure Home is my magnum opus, some 700 pages about everything about designing and structuring a high-security residence or retreat and all of the equipment that goes in it, lots of references. My bestseller is Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Safe Places. It's in its third edition and has all new color maps and analysis for all the 50 states as well as all the provinces of Canada, even an entire new section on international retreating as well. My last book is How to Build a High-Security Shelter in an Existing Basement, and it's an architectural map with architectural plans in it. All three of these books are available from Radio Liberty.
By calling 1-800-544-8927. That's 1-800-544-8927. And Strategic Relocation, the book Strategic Relocation, is one of our best sellers. But you go right ahead, Joel.
Thanks, Dan. Well, as I was saying, sometimes they use Democrats to get things into office, like universal health care that Obama did. Sometimes they use Republicans to get things into office that a Democrat couldn't get away with it. And one of those is probably going to be a tax increase through a VAT tax. It will take a, quote, responsible Republican to say, well, we cut as much as we can and we still need more, and so we're going to have to raise revenue. Well, and, conservatives are convinced, unfortunately, when a Republican is in office that the bad medicine isn't so bad, and they eventually learn to accept it. So we end up corrupting our own constituency when we elect a compromising Republican. The more this election digresses into outright voter manipulation, the more I'm convinced that Ron Paul is our only hope. And unfortunately, he's being viewed by the major media as the enemy of the people, much like Ibsen's play, where the enemy of the people is really the true champion of the people, but the state labels them as an enemy, and that's exactly how they're treating Ron Paul.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, I heard some very good conservative telling me the other day that he liked Ron Paul, but he wanted to legalize drugs, and so basically he wants all sorts of laws against drugs because he doesn't want somebody, driving down the highway there high on drugs that might run into him. And he doesn't understand, he just doesn't understand. It is not the function of the federal government to regulate drugs. If you don't want to have drugs, of course, you go ahead and do that at the state level. But the whole function of the federal government was to have a federal government whose powers were limited and carefully and closely defined. The power
and there
of
would
the state.
Still be laws, of course, against driving under the influence
Right.
of drugs.
Sure.
And there still would be consequences and things. It's just that you don't regulate them a priori or before the fact of a violation unless they're an imminent threat, and that's how you arrest people who are weaving down the highway. They're an imminent threat, and so you can enforce the law.
But that's a state law. These are not federal laws. That's the
Right,
thing.
right.
And basically,
Yeah.
that is what people do not understand. And if we can't keep drugs out of our prisons, How are we going to actually have certainly restrict drugs in our society unless we have a total police state? And even if we had a total police state, we still couldn't stop the use of drugs because they can't keep them out of our prisons. Go right ahead.
Well, the reason they can't keep them out of our prisons is we have a corrupt prison system. And that's important. And the reason we don't keep drugs out of the country is we have a corrupt government, which actually is running drugs on behalf of the CIA.
I think that.
But you're absolutely right that, in fact, it would take the profit out of it if they were allowed to do that. And, you would have to increase the penalties for the misuse of drugs. Just like you can increase the penalties, for child pornography, there should be ability of parents to sue, for influencing young children and things without permission from the parents. There's many ways in liberty law that we can create disincentives to stop people from acting out of things. But in their private, if they can do so responsibly without harming other people's rights, we have to allow those things to happen. But Stan, the third-party question continues to plague the establishment. One subscriber wrote, will Ron Paul remain within the party confines, apply his capital leverage at the convention, or bolt and go as an independent libertarian? If he exercises the latter, the pundits generally agree upon a Ross Perot scenario like 1992. But this time around, Ron Paul actually stands a solid chance to become a winner in a third-party contest. And here's why. Ron Paul's core support is now around 20%. Republican support total is only 27% of the nation, and Democrats hold only 31%. So the vast majority of people are independents, and a lot of them are tending towards Ron Paul, as well as many principal Democrats and conservative Republicans. This means that in the three-way race for the first time since the Whigs lost their status as a major party, we have the opportunity to bust the two-party system wide open. So don't pass off lightly that an independent candidacy would be suicide. Of course, the ire of the substantial majority of Americans is now so hot against the establishment, this well may be our greatest opportunity to stage a political rebellion against the two-party system.
And I think this is something people really should stop and think about. The majority, I believe almost a majority of the independents would go for Ron Paul. And I think there are a lot of very liberal Democrats who are so against the war and would like to limit the power of government. And they're not really socialists. They're actually dedicated to freedom, too. That's what the real, true liberal was. They were the people who believed in limiting the power of government. Unfortunately, everything's got confused today. But there are a lot of Democrats who are good people who believe in freedom, and Ron Paul's certainly views resonate with them as well. Go right ahead.
Well, my problem with principled liberals is that they just don't understand the consequences of saying, let government, help people, let government give welfare, let government give foreign aid. They just don't know the hidden consequences that come when you sap money out of the economy to redistribute to other people. There is a penalty to be paid. It isn't free money. Either whether you create it, which is what the Fed has been doing for many years, or whether you tax people. Either way, it is a tax on people, and there's disincentives involved. And that's one of the reasons why in the debt ceiling game, there's no political will to cut spending in the U.S., at least not for each particular voter's pet projects. Cut the other guy's welfare, cut the other guy's foreign aid, but, I want the federal spending for the arts, and I want this and that, and I want this and that, because everybody has to pay for it. And so my bill, my portion of that's very small. That's a very, very deceptive thing. But there's also no political will for more taxes unless the politician promises a new kind of tax, like a VAT, that is promised to reduce other taxes. That's the promise they'll give us. That's how they got the income tax in. In Oregon, where they don't have an income tax, they have a sales tax, and they keep trying to convince the people to have an income tax. It will reduce your sales taxes. But I say never let them get away with that. Never let them give you a new tax without eliminating a complete other tax, so that they can't tweak up multiple taxes. The more types of tax they have, the easier it is to tweak each one in little increments. The flat tax, for example, doesn't eliminate the IRS as people think, or it's snooping into your income, and neither does a VAT tax. In fact, it increases intrusion because everyone has an account for everything, has to account for everything they sell, and remit a portion to the government. Everybody has to do all these tax calculations now. It's just terrible. The Treasury on Tuesday once again used funds that were supposed to go into the Federal Employees Retirement Fund to fund the general obligations to keep from going past the debt limit. Remember when he had all that bluster about the $14 trillion debt limit and the solution of a super committee that failed? Well, just a few months later, Obama is requesting a raise to the country's legal debt limit to $16 trillion now. That means it's going up almost $2 trillion in less than 6 months. This is getting exponential. Congress turned down the debt ceiling request this week, but it was merely a sham vote so that congressmen could say they voted against the debt ceiling. It was meaningless because at the failure of the super committee, Congress resolved the issue, quote, resolved it, or kicked the can down the road, by giving Obama the power to hike the debt ceiling 2 more times without congressional approval. This is one of them, and Congress can only overturn Obama's debt ceiling hike by a 2/3 majority. He didn't even have to come to Congress to ask. It's just political maneuvering. Once this political charade passes, there will be yet another vote on the debt ceiling, and you'll see far less of a vote for that limit when it really counts. In other words, far less congressmen will vote for a debt ceiling the third time around when it really does mean something. So don't waste your efforts pushing for an amendment to the Constitution on a balanced budget amendment when we simply only have to have a majority vote that will stop the debt ceiling, and that forces, once you stop the debt ceiling, Congress to start operating under a balanced budget amendment. And I think that's the simplest way to get fiscal spending is to not increase the debt ceiling.
Well, I agree with you. Of course, they passed legislation many years ago that required a balanced budget, but you don't expect Congress to obey the law, do you? Go right ahead.
Oh, how true. Well, let's see. Another major topic this week has been the issue of SOPA, which is I'm trying to think what the acronym is now. It's about something against privacy. The Internet crowd won the first round of this battle, but those who understand the dangers of government using privacy or piracy enforcement as a lever against free use of the Internet know that the powers that be aren't going to take no for an answer. In other words, they'll be back. The government made its next propaganda ploy yesterday, or actually today, by announcing an indictment of megaupload.com for piracy, just to showcase the need for the law.
Well, I think what people have to understand, this is all about cutting off access to information. Since 6 major corporations control most of the media outlets in America, they've been able to largely control what American people think. But with the advent of certainly of the Internet, now people are having an opportunity to hear and learn the truth. They cannot allow that, so they're talking about piracy. We saw the same thing a number of years ago when, of course, they did not want books that told the truth to be readily available, so they brought in something that had to do with Mickey Mouse and the rights to Walt Disney to be able to preserve the image of Mickey Mouse so other people couldn't use Mickey Mouse. And we had, of course, to protect Mickey Mouse, we had to extend, I think it was from 40 to 70 years, the copyright level on books. And so now, of course, many books out there written 50 years ago that tell the truth, you can't republish. You can't take the large parts of them and put up on the Internet because you're violating essentially privacy laws. And, of course, now that's what this whole thing about the Internet is. It's a means of suppressing the truth under the name of, well, who could be in favor of piracy?
Well, SOPA is an acronym for Stop Online Piracy. And, of course, they're aiming, they say, towards foreign-based sites like Pirate Bay and megaupload.com, which are outside the realm of our law. And that brings today's propaganda announcement about this indictment against megaupload.com. This is a foreign site. What good is that going to do? But they... it's almost like the government is shooting their foot by bringing that up as a means of drumming up support for SOPA. Its proposed bill aims to crack down on copyright infringement, as you say, from rogue seas oversight. However, that's not the part that really bothers, because it's already illegal, to do pirating of other people without paying. But it's the fine print in SOPA. The goal is to cut off their supply of buyers by requiring that companies not transmit any funds to them. And it requires that Google and other search engines should not or should be able to have a filter on there, like the communist Chinese have in China, that when you type in the Pirate Bay, nothing comes up. So you see, that's a problem, because we don't want to have that kind of a filter like China has on the Internet, because there's other things in the bill that indicate this is kind of language. It says anything that facilitates copyright infringement. I mean, I remember once when I had an early website I had a professional website designer do it, and they put on a picture on the website because they needed some pictures of homes to advertise for my secure home book. And they got a picture off a free photographic site, and they put it on. Well, it come to find out that that picture eventually was sold to Getty Images, which is the big predator in the field. And they have a search bot that goes through the Internet and searches for all the pictures. And they came up with mine and said, we own that picture now, and now you owe us thousands of dollars. And under this new law, they could actually shut my website down for piracy or for copyright violation.
And what they really want to do is limit access to information. The last thing they want is for the American people to learn about the subversive activities of the Brotherhood of Darkness and their really real goal, and that is to use the financial and military of the United States to bring about a one-world totalitarian government under certainly the Brotherhood of Darkness, this group of wicked and evil people who worship a different God. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up today's program here at Radio Liberty. Well, Joel, we have 3 minutes for you to wrap up today's program, and then we'll let you go.
Well, as I say, they won't take no for an answer. By no sense of the imagination are these bills scuttled, despite Senate websites reportedly buckling under the weight of constituents weighing in against this measure. Sure, the worst part of the proposal is mandating DNS redirecting of websites deemed dedicated to infringing appear to be histories, but there's still plenty to protest, including possible mandatory orders for the nation's ISPs to build a version of the Chinese Great Firewall to prevent users from visiting sites such as Pirate Bay. The chances of this firewall being later used to block dissident opinion and information is almost certain. If SOPA becomes law, natural healing websites like herbalhealer.com or naturalnews.com may easily be shut down for promoting natural remedies not approved by establishment medicine. How do you say this happens? Well, the proposed law contains a provision in Section 105 which allows the U.S. government to shut down websites it claims endangers the public health. So you see, it's always the little fine print in these bills, Stan, that really gets you. That's really dangerous given the government's long history of trying to discourage natural remedies. In a perverse sense, the establishment medical system is pushing to force people to participate also in vaccine trials. Why? Because the word's getting out about the danger of vaccines and few people are volunteering wisely. But now an article published in the American Medical Association is advocating that participation in vaccine trials be mandatory, arguing that people should be forced to take experimental shots in just the same vein as jury service is compulsory. Isn't that incredible?
I think it is. I think it's frightening because you cannot trust them in the least bit. You never know what's in those shots. And basically one shot can destroy your life or the life of a loved one forever. I wish that certain vaccines you might be able to justify certainly on a risk basis, but since you do not know what is in them and you can't trust them and they lie, why, of course, I just tell people don't take the vaccines.
I agree. It's something we've got to be careful of.
Well, Joe, we're out of time. Anyway, they're exciting times. We'll certainly look forward to being with you again next week as we evaluate the things that are going on. Our guest, of course, has been Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. Once again, the telephone number to get a copy.
You have to get a copy from my website
or
by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com.
Editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. God bless. Thanks very much, Joel, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, Stan.
Bye-bye. Okay, fine. That was Joel Skousen. We hope you enjoy our weekly programming with Well, this is Dr. Stan, and we hope you enjoy our weekly programs with Joel Skousen. We are living in very, very dangerous times. Certainly, everything points to the fact that they're planning on taking us into a war with Iran. Is it coming in weeks, months, several years? I don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see. But believe me, what is really frightening to me is there's not more of an outcry from the average American. You know, when you start a war, you never know how it's going to end. So if you go to the background of World War I, everybody thought it would be over in a few weeks. And, of course, it dragged on for 4 horrible, bloody years. When the Boer War came about, certainly in 1899, when the English people were saying, our boys will be home by Christmas. They'll be home by Christmas, but they didn't stipulate which Christmas, and 100,000 casualties later, why, of course, the boys did come home. 100,000 casualties and 3 years later. When, of course, the Korean War started in 1950, the slogan was, our boys will be home by Christmas. MacArthur will have the war won. Our boys are still there. We still are at war with North Korea. Understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the terrible things lie ahead, and I fear this next war is going to be the bloodiest war of all time. We are going to enter into the class of civilizations that Samuel Huntington so wisely wrote about in his essays and in his articles in Foreign Affairs magazine. Read what Samuel Huntington had to say, and the warning against going to war with 1.5 billion Muslims throughout the world. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a long and terrible and bloody war. And there are powerful spiritual forces at work in our society as well, and you can't understand what's going on unless you understand the supernatural element before everything taking place. You need to read my book, Brotherhood of Darkness. You need to hear my talks, number 1 on the Dark Secret, number 2 on the Forbidden Secret. That's a DVD. Do not confuse it with a book on the Forbidden Secret, which is excellent, but it's on an entirely different subject written by Jonathan Gray. If you get the talk on the Forbidden Secret, you should get the syllabus along with it, and you get that at a reduced rate. You need to understand how this all fits into this long-range spiritual battle. You need to get my talk on the World Revolution, where you'll see my interview with Ambassador Earl T. Smith, U.S. Ambassador to Cuba at the time of the Revolution, who will tell you we knew Fidel Castro was a communist, the State Department knew Fidel Castro was a communist, the CIA knew Fidel Castro was a communist. That's why we brought him to power, but we can't let the American people know that. Certainly, the book that goes along with World Revolution was written by David Rockefeller. It's called Memoirs. We have it. If you get my book, Brotherhood of Darkness, I suggest you get Barry Goldwater's book, with no apologies. They're second-hand copies, but you need to read from about page 275 to the end of the chapter, page 275 to the end of the chapter, the essay, certainly the chapter on America's unelected rulers. You think we have a two-party system? Well, Barry Goldwater didn't think so. He knew that these people control both political parties and made mockery of the electoral process. Read what Senator Barry Goldwater said in his book, With No Apologies. We, of course, carry Professor Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, his other book on the Anglo-American establishment. If you want to hear Professor Quigley talking about what's going on, we have an interview with him in our Secret Government 4-tape set, where you'll also hear my interview with Norman Dodd. My interview with Norman Dodd, where he tells you that the great tax-exempt foundations are working in America under a White House directive to so alter life in America that one day we can be peacefully merged with the Soviet Union. And then we ask you to pray for America, to pray for revival, but please pray for Radio Liberty, our provision and protection.